Bernard, congratulations on your recent Oscar nomination for Arrival for Best Sound Mixing. How did it feel when you got the news you'd been nominated?
Sorry?
I said, how did it feel when you got the news you'd been nominated?
It was overwhelming. It's an unreal feeling, really, of honor. Seeing also the other nominees that are there and the films that were nominated and for us to be part of that is completely crazy, and it's a great joy and great pride, and also very happy for the whole team that was part of that film and everybody in Montreal, and it was great.
Well, congratulations again. I want to start by asking you, so often people ask what is the distinction between these two sound categories, editing and mixing. Give us some insight into what your role on a film is as the sound mixer, and in particular on a film like Arrival, some of the challenges that may be entailed in that role.
Well, the sound mixing is making sure that all the sound that are being created for the film and that are being brought, and all the ideas that are brought to the soundtrack are as clearly presented and are rendered the best that it can be, for the ideas to be as clearly presented, and the film to live in its sound as smoothly as possible, because there's so many ideas that are brought into the stage. There's so many sounds, so many possibilities, and the role of the mixer is make sure that the ideas are clear, are understandable, are getting through to the audience, and that the director's presentation is getting through to the audience, and for the film to be sound wise for the audience to be really to be involved in the film.
Speaking of sound, I think some email keeps popping up there, and
is it on my side?
Yes, it is. Do you know?
I'm so sorry. I don't know. This is not my computer, so.
Oh, that's okay.
I'm not going to turn off the sound because I won't hear you anymore. I'm sorry.
Well, that's okay. We can barrel through it. Anyway, so on a film like Arrival, you've got it's all about communication,
mm-hmm.
and it's all about these alien communications. So talk about the challenges of that.
Well, there were challenges in many different ways. The role of the sound, the communication sound had a particular role also in creating this barrier of understanding between the aliens themselves and the crew that were going and arriving to meet them. And also it allowed for Louise Banks, Amy's character, to be able to free herself from this barrier and to present herself personally to the aliens. So that all those levels of sound communication and parasites of having difficulties understanding everyone was important for it to eventually be broken by someone just exposing herself and to actually personally meeting the aliens there and taking the risk of showing herself as she is to them. So it was important for it to be multiple layers of different sound textures, and having this complex level of communication between all the characters, for it to become free and eventually become pure communication between the two beings involved. And to get to that was, I'm sure I might repeat stuff that Sylvain might have said. There was a huge amount of work into trying to come up as a mixer, to come up with sound textures that were not just plugins and overly used textures. And as myself as a mixer, I like to put myself into a different situation every time, and to have those texture recorded, because we had all the dialogue lines going through real communication devices, multiple different ones, to force us to some to some really nice texture and find a better one to use for every situation. And then of course there's ADR that is going to be added throughout the process. So we had to recreate those textures that we had recorded. And so instead of going from plugins, finding the proper plugins to be able to create the texture, we went from real communication devices and then created similar version of them using plugins, but forcing us to mimic the real ones that we created, and then through multiple different plugins to create those sounds for them to be able to insert ADR lines and changing ADR lines after we had done this whole recording process of getting all those dialogues lines through those communication devices.
Right. A lot of complex work goes into making this stuff sound as if it's actually coming from a natural, from the voice of the actors and from phones and recording device. It's the kind of thing that can very easily seem unnatural if done wrong or slipshotty.
Yeah. That was something we tried to we really gave a thought to it, and we didn't want it to be just another things we do faster, or for technical reasons we can go and do things faster. But for this film, we really wanted to have depth into the sounds of different communication devices we were facing.
Now, were you involved in creating the specific sounds of the aliens, the specific language of that, or?
Not at all. That was done by Dave Whitehead and his wife, Michelle, and Sylvain was part also working with Dave. My role in it was to give them the proper strength and acoustics within the ship, and giving them the weight that was already in the track. This track sounded amazing, but then putting them into the context of it. And we all worked together trying to figure out what was the proper amount of communication and what were they supposed to say, and the sounds we were hearing, what would be what would be the meaning of them, to understand what and how they should talk. So throughout the mix, we dosed all of that. We moved things around, and throughout the layers that we had, we just kept on working that all the way to the end.
Right. I mean, it's such a complex soundscape that you're dealing with here, and then you throw in music eventually, and you've got to balance that as well. What's interesting about this film that really sets it apart from a lot of science fiction is that there is a realism to it. There's sort of a naturalism to the aesthetic. Can you talk a little bit about how that affected your work?
Yeah, well, I think it's something that we've seen also in different films, sci-fi films in the past, that are taking place into some realistic environment. And I think for Denis Villeneuve, what was important for us to relate as best as we could to the character of Louise Banks, and keeping things natural all around it, helped us relate to what was actually happening there, and their sounds that we could naturally hear, like the ships moving. There were a lot of talks, and it was clear that they didn't want to have no engines, no like real sci-fi-ish kind of engine sound to it. So what Sylvain went for was rocks and ice. He might have talked about it also. And then my role in it was making sure that we would feel them as being the ground shaking. And there's the beautiful stage where the stage, the landscape where this is taking place, with we can see hills on side. So I really wanted the sound to bounce off all of that and to become as realistic possible, to feel like mountains are shaking when that thing is moving around. Also, what else we can talk about? There were a lot of talks about how things should sound within the ship, the spaceship itself, and there were a lot of things I threw in, a lot of ideas of how, let's say, Louise Banks' voice when she's within the ship with the aliens themselves, how stuff would sound in there, and everybody's looking for the sound that you've never heard before, and that is quite a challenge to figure out something that you would never heard before. So you try reverb, delays, slaps, and stuff like that, sound tools that you can to create acoustics, and they all turn out to be something you've heard before. So simpler the better. I think what we ended up using for those kind of environments were keeping it more simple. And for her voice when she's in the ship, all this smoke around and stuff, instead of going something really electronically treating. So I just thought of kind of an effect, a little bit like the helium effect you have in voice, but you can have the opposite also if you're like breathing in, I think, what is it, nitrogen or something in,
right,
brings the voice down. So going for something like that, I just thought of, dampening her voice, like just this mysterious fog around her. Again, it's a more natural approach to than electronic and altering tools, let's say.
It also helps convey the emotion of what's going on, because the film is all about her perspective, all about her coming to terms with her own life and what she learns from her interactions with these beings. Yes,
it does, and that was a great goal of us. I mean, when I say my, it's the whole team, but as a mixer, I really tried to keep us as close as possible to Louise. Little subtleties also of Foley when we're close up, we're on close up of her. A little following like the shallow depth of field use in the picture when we're on her. We're always focusing on her in the same way. So those were things that we tried to stay very close to her, and if she's overwhelmed, we're trying to be overwhelmed. When she's into the hazmat, we're trying to make it as claustrophobic as possible, and to keep, and like there's this scene the first time she's listening to the recordings of that. After the first visit, she went into the spaceship and heard the alien's voice. We just see her in the background, and we get closer to her as she's listening to them on headphones. And the point of view was all about her, and everything on the background is subdued, and we hear, as she is hearing, the heptapods as loud and clear as she would with headphones. And those are all things that we did in trying to give us her perspective on things.
And working with Villeneuve, what is that collaboration like?
It's amazing. Denis is the most positive director, one of the most positive director I've ever met. If he doesn't like your idea, he'll take 5 minutes to tell you how great it is, how great your idea was, and how much he loved that you brought it up. And then he'll say, well, let's try something. And so he's very focused. He's very there are things that he trusts people into creating, and when he feels he's well surrounded, he's not going to spend time on things that just are good. There are things he didn't even comment because he just felt they were right, and he didn't need to comment things absolutely. So everything that worked, it worked well, and then things that were specific things that he really wanted, and he had us change things completely, and doing so through encouragement and really positive attitude. He's wonderful.
And what attracted you to becoming a sound mixer? What made you want to get into that particular field of filmmaking?
Oh, it's a long story. Well, first, my dad was a very well-known mixer in Montreal. And I grew up with a dad mixer and a mother who was a teacher in acoustics. So I was surrounded by sound all my life, and
born into it.
yeah, literally. And I myself was a musician, singing in choirs a lot, and for like from 10 years old to 25 years old, maybe I was singing a lot in music, but I didn't have really musical talent. And eventually a job came up as a recordist at the studio where my dad worked. And just went there and I understood everything technically. But my mother eventually came to me and said, "Why don't you try that?" And it was later, after my dad passed away, I learned it was from him that she asked me to do that. He didn't want to come up as the father, and enforcing his son's path. And when I tried it, it just made complete sense. All the music love that I had of and mixing things together was for me the great a revelation that we could actually do all of those things straight from our feelings and the way, and that not only that people hear it, people understand, and eventually people feel what you're feeling at the console. It just became such a pleasure to do, and from there on, I never turned back on my decision.
Well, Bernard, congratulations again. I think you made the right decision in in your career choice. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thank you very much for your time and interest.
You're welcome, of course.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.